What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I'm taking you through the top 4 tools you need to get into blacksmithing. Now before we get started, I am a level 1 certified blacksmith in the state of California, in the California Blacksmithing Association, and I've been doing this for a little under 3 years at this point, so I am still very much a kind of novice beginner myself, and this is my perspective on the tools that you absolutely have to get into the art or craft of blacksmithing. So without any further ado, let's get rocking. Now, the first tool you need, and this is going to seem probably pretty obvious to most of you, is a hammer. If you are just getting into blacksmithing or you are considering getting into blacksmithing, I'm going to fall in line with most of the people that you are going to talk to in the forums on Facebook, YouTube, etc. in telling you not to go to Etsy or Instagram or the various YouTube channels out there and spend anywhere from $150 to $200 on a very nice, professionally made, handmade hammer. There's a few reasons for that. One is, as you are getting into blacksmithing, as you're learning how to actually use your hammer and you're hammering on different pieces of steel, you're inevitably going to miss. And if you miss, the thing that you are going to hit is probably the edge or the face of your anvil or whatever anvil substitute you have. We'll get into that in a second. Now, because the face of your hammer is hardened, as is the face of a properly made anvil, both the hammer and the anvil are going to take a decent amount of damage, possibly chipping or denting, depending on how hard the face of your anvil or your hammer are, and that's actually going to transfer to your work as you start, getting better progressively and continue using your hammers. Every little divot, chip, etc. in the face of your hammer is going to leave the negative of that on a piece of work, and number 2, all of those dents and scratches and nicks and chips that you take out of your hammer face are into something that you invested a decent amount of money in. As a result, it's going to kind of hurt your soul, so to speak, like scratching a new car, for example. Now, the alternative to this, and my recommendation, is simply go to your favorite hardware store, Ace Hardware, Harbor Freight, what have you, and pick up a $10 engineer's hammer. For any of you that joined me from my TikTok days, this is my $10 engineer's hammer that I bought at Harbor Freight about a year ago just to do a TikTok video for, and I've honestly used it fairly frequently over the past year as kind of a cheapo hammer that I can use for striking the ends of my punches to avoid putting extra divots and things in my nicer hammers. But this I brought home from Harbor Freight, dressed the edges of the flat face to where they were more of a rounded over edge as opposed to the sharp edge that comes on them, and then I did a lot of grinding on this face to turn the other side into sort of a rounding hammer shape in order to get nearly the same utility as my $150 to $200 rounding hammer that I first started out with. Now, depending on your train of thought, there are multiple kind of styles or ways to develop your hammer skill as you get into the art of blacksmithing. One of the styles requires no further tools than simply your hammer and far more patience than I ever had, certainly, and that is to take your hammer of choice and a box of nails and go find a stump, a plank of wood, etc., and simply hammer 100 nails into that stump. That doesn't sound too difficult until you go do it or try it for half an hour, and of course every blacksmithing instructor tells you to start with 100 and then move on to higher and higher numbers until you get to the point where you can hammer in those nails with either a single swing or never miss or what have you. That is fantastic in developing your hand-eye coordination, developing your kind of innate sense of how to use the hammer, because a lot of blacksmithing and hammer skill really is muscle memory and developing kind of the feel of how to hit steel, how hard to hit it, etc. So that is pretty good advice. I just simply never had the patience for it because I wanted to start hitting hot steel and making things, and kind of working on the basics while I develop my hammer skill. That would be why I have a decent number of divots in the face of, or both faces of this hammer, because I really just kind of started hammering things. I still have, in my opinion, fairly decent hand-eye coordination, so I don't miss often, but everyone misses the piece that they're working on at least once or twice, and more so when you're just a beginner getting into the craft, and you will ding the crap out of the face of your hammer. It is inevitable, sorry. The other camp or train of thought, so to speak, is to simply not do what I did and start with that inexpensive hammer and just start making things with whatever you've got. Get steel hot, hammer it until you get it to a shape that will develop your hammer skills. Hopefully it doesn't teach you any bad habits, and kind of start introducing you to the various skills, the tapering, the octagon shaping that you will use in every project as you progress. So that's what I did. I can't say that it's perfect for everybody, but it worked for me. So if that is the way you want to go, don't let me stop you. Now, the second tool that you absolutely need to get into the art or craft of blacksmithing is an anvil. Now, I know there are many of you out there who have watched an episode, a season, the entirety of Forged in Fire, and decided, I could do that. I want to get into blacksmithing, bladesmithing, etc., and you pulled out your phone, started scrolling through the different anvils for sale, and realized that they can range anywhere from $150 to $3,000, and you don't even know the difference between them. Well, let me help with that. Anvils are one of the most vital tools in a blacksmithing workshop or a smithy, simply because they are a heavy piece of steel that is remotely flat. There are countless anvil substitutes out there on YouTube, TikTok, etc., and I can almost guarantee you they are all worth it. All of them are workable. You do not need to go out and spend $600, $800, $1,000 on a big, heavy, brand new, nice anvil in order to get into blacksmithing. I know some of you may think that is a hot take for the blacksmithing community, but anyone in the blacksmithing community will probably tell you that they started on something like this. This is a screen capture from one of my TikToks that shows me using a railroad track chained to a simple tree stump that I got from my grandfather here back a few years, and that is what I started on before I bought my nice 125-pound Cliff Carroll anvil. Now, especially for people that are getting into blacksmithing and don't know if they're going to like it, getting some sort of anvil substitute like a piece of railroad track, or simply taking, use my hammer as an example, but taking a sledgehammer and mounting the head on a piece of wood to use as a flat weighted piece of steel to hammer steel on. The options for improvising a anvil, or what many people in the blacksmithing community call a anvil shaped object, are going to get you by until you can either afford to buy a new anvil, find one for a reasonable price on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, or manage to be gifted by people that suddenly know that you are a blacksmith or in the craft, what have you. Most people will tell you that in order to find a good anvil, you need to look at strictly the antiques, the old hay buttons, the Trentons, etc. I use a brand new anvil that I bought just a couple of years ago off of Centaur Forge's website, if I remember correctly. It is a 125-pound Cliff Carroll anvil, and I bought it for $650. I think that price has raised since I purchased mine. Now, a nice kind of blend or medium between those two viewpoints, the really nice fancy or antique anvil, or the just simple anvil shaped object, is one of the anvils from either just a Harbor Freight or Vivor that you can find on Amazon. Spend $100 to $200 on a 60 to 70 pound anvil and get started. That minimizes the amount of initial upfront investment that you have to make, while giving you a really nice flat surface. And while it may not be the highest quality anvil, have the best rebound or the nicest ring to it, some people would suggest that those aren't the best metrics by which you should measure an anvil anyway. It will give you something to use and again practice your hammer skill and develop your skills and get better on without a massive investment. Now, other options include things like that railroad track, a 4 to 8 pound sledge mounted to a wood plank, as I mentioned previous, but I've seen people use 20-pound cast iron dumbbells. I've seen people use forklift tines, and I've even seen people use hard rocks. And I'm certainly no geologist, so I personally couldn't tell you what type of rock would be best to avoid it cracking or fracturing under the force of your hammer blows. But there are countless people all over the world who are using the simplest of tools to make absolutely phenomenal pieces of art or blades, what have you, with a hammer and a flat stone. So don't let not having a really nice fancy anvil hold you back from getting into blacksmithing. Now, the third tool on the list of tools that you absolutely have to get into blacksmithing is a forge. Now, it wouldn't be blacksmithing if you didn't have some way to heat a piece of steel to cherry red to a bright yellow color and then be able to shape it with a hammer. Now, I am a big proponent for not spending a ton of money on a forge, because just like anvils, forges, especially propane forges, can get very expensive very quickly, but it may be difficult to figure out which forges are good and which ones are just trying to sell you on features or gimmicks, what have you. Now, I started out with a Majestic forge, which is the brand of forge they use on the TV show Forged in Fire. That was a coincidence. I enjoyed using it for quite a while, and then while I was in California, I don't know what was going on. This was prior to me ever trying to forge weld. The fire brick that they install in the base or the bottom of the forge started to melt, and it started to basically melt to the point where it was leaving a black sticky forge scale, for lack of a better word, on all of my pieces. It was kind of integrating into the surface of the different things that I was forging, and the forge itself started to break down, mostly due to a couple years of use. And I kind of came to the realization that unless you get a very, very high quality forge, it's only gonna last you as long as maybe 3 to 5 years. I will admit that I move a lot, and a lot of the fire brick cracked and things during my second to most recent move, mostly due to just the movers not knowing what it was, and as such they didn't handle it with a lot of care. And that also led to a lot of the breakdown. If you really take care of your tools and you don't do a lot of moving or have a lot of events that cause degradation of the tools, you should be able to make them last a lot longer. And fire brick is a really nice kind of replaceable commodity. You can go down to pretty much any hardware store and buy new fire brick that is rated to, 23, 24, 27, 100 degrees Fahrenheit and just reinstall. You can also order it on Amazon. But high temperature fire brick to lay in the bottom of your forge as kind of a sacrificial piece that you can take out once it's messed up and throw it away. I didn't really have an understanding of that when I bought and used my first forge. The Majestic has a fairly small opening on it, and as such, wedging a piece of fire brick in as kind of a subfloor wouldn't have worked for me anyway. But I am a big proponent, and this video is not sponsored. I have no actual ties to this company, but I found through a number of, Facebook posts and forums online, the Mr. Volcano Hero 1 and Hero 2. That's their single burner and double burner forge kit on Amazon. And at least when I first purchased mine, Amazon was the only place that you could actually buy these. The Mr. Volcano is a fantastic forge. The burners on them themselves are absolutely worth the money. And I've been able to get forge welding temperatures without any major adjustments or issues. The first forge welds I ever did in a propane forge, or at all for that matter, were in the Mr. Volcano. So don't let anyone tell you that they are not capable of forge welding temperatures or they're low quality. They are really good bang for your buck, I gotta say. All right, so in the process of editing this video, I have found some unfortunate news regarding the Mr. Volcano series of forges. It seems that at the time of posting this video, the Mr. Volcano brand is no longer producing the forge bodies. It does seem that at this time you can still get the refractory cement, the KO wool blanket, the burners, the various components except for the body of the forge itself. So if you are looking to create your own forge, that would be a good place to start. However, unfortunately at this time they are not selling the actual forge bodies, so you may have to find a different route to go from now on. So I apologize, all of the information and the discussion I did for the Mr. Volcano is still valid. I think that they're great little forges for the money, and if you can get one secondhand, or find one that someone wants to get rid of, I'd recommend still grabbing one when you can. And in the future, I will be doing some sort of budget forge creation video to hopefully help out in the meantime. This is unfortunate for beginner blacksmiths because that was one of the most affordable forge options out there. I'm gonna have to do some more research and eventually do a completely different video on budget forges now that that's kind of been taken off the market. So back to it, but just know that the discussion that I just had about the Mr. Volcano isn't necessarily up to date anymore. So back to the video, but yeah, sorry for the unfortunate news. I've seen propane tanks, fire extinguisher tanks, even just fabricating the own shell of your forge out of plate steel. And if you have a welder and an angle grinder and different tools to facilitate doing that, that's a great way to go. But some people have gotten really creative with their homemade forge designs, and they get some incredible heat out of them and really high efficiencies. And if that's the way you want to go, more power to you. I love the ingenuity and the DIY spirit, so definitely thumbs up from me. Other options include going to Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and looking for a used coal forge. And if you are in a place in the country where you can get a hold of nice coke or coal or even charcoal, sometimes, but especially coke, which is the cleanest kind of highest efficiency version of coal, it's a great way to go. I've been working at a shop here in Connecticut that has only a coal forge, and it's been a blast being able to get really pinpoint heats on steel and kind of getting into the old way, so to speak, of blacksmithing. Homemade versions of a coal forge include brake drum forges. You can find plans all over the internet for those, taking an old 18-wheeler brake drum or something similar to make a fire pot, and some way fitting it to a stand so that you can pile coal into it and create the actual fire in it, or simply welding together, if you have the skills, a fire pot into just a simple steel table or something of that nature. Coal forges can be very simple, however they need some sort of blower. So you'll also need to look into maybe looking at Craigslist or Facebook, again, for champion hand crank blowers or different various kind of vintage hand crank blowers. They do make newer versions of those that may be cheaper if you find the options that aren't vintage, but also simply using a hairdryer or some sort of electric motor blower like those used to blow up air mattresses can get you by until you can afford or find a better version, or some people stick with those for their entire career and they work. Again, don't let not having the best of the best version of a forge hold you back from just heating a piece of steel and getting into the craft. All right, the fourth and final tool on the list of tools that you absolutely need to get into blacksmithing are a pair of tongs. There are many people out there, myself included, that will be the first to tell you you do not need a pair of tongs to get into blacksmithing. And I absolutely agree with that. To a point. There are many projects out there and many things that you should be focusing on early in your blacksmithing career or your blacksmithing hobby, such as simply forging square forward tapers or curves or bends, things that you can simply just buy a long enough piece of steel that the heat is pretty much just focused up here toward the end, and you can just hang on to it without even having a pair of gloves on. That is the best way to control the piece of steel that you're working on. You're going to have the absolute best dexterity simply using your hand, even if you have to wear a glove on your left hand to avoid, burning. Please don't burn yourself. If you are heating a piece of steel repeatedly, it is going to get hot and you need to wear some sort of protective glove on your non-dominant, non-hammer hand to protect yourself. So disclaimer, do not touch hot steel with your bare skin. But there is going to come a time, probably pretty early on in your blacksmithing hobby, where you've either used up the end of that steel to the point where you can't hang on without it being too hot anymore, even with gloves, and you're going to need something to hang on to that piece of steel, or simply abandon it until you can find something to hold on to it with. That is where a nice pair of multi-purpose tongs come in, because they stretch that piece of steel out away from your hand and let you hang on to it no matter how short it is. Now, I love a good actual pair of blacksmithing tongs. This is the first pair of tongs I ever bought. I think it's a pair of Champion wolf jaw tongs. They're a great pair of tongs. I think I bought them for $40 to $50 a few years back. And the thing about them is that they can hold steel sideways as well as in line with the jaws, and especially when working with a 1/4 inch round or bigger, these really do well holding the steel in line with the jaws, and then you can manipulate by twisting your wrist or in any way that you can handle the tongs. It is almost as good as holding the piece of steel by hand. You don't have quite the same dexterity, and I gotta tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than finding a piece of steel that doesn't quite fit in the tongs that you have and having to fiddle with it to pick it up, or otherwise dropping it because the tong jaws just simply don't fit it correctly, which again goes back to if you can hold it with your hand or with a gloved hand, that's the way I recommend you start. But at some point you're going to need a pair of tongs, and you can find tongs all over the internet. Blacksmith Depot is a great place to start, or surprisingly, you can find some really nice pairs of tongs on Amazon. I got these for Christmas. I didn't buy them myself, but you can find some really nice usable tongs on Amazon for not very expensive. Tongs, thankfully, are some of the less expensive tools and the least expensive tools on this list, certainly. However, maybe you don't have the extra money to buy a number of pairs of tongs. A lot of blacksmiths will tell you that there is a pair of tongs for every single different job that you need them for, and as such, we tend to collect them. In the meantime, options other than using tongs include, but are not limited to, simply a pair of pliers. I know plenty of people out there that are using a simple pair of channel lock pliers because that's all they got, and they don't need to use the pliers frequently enough to warrant spending $30, $40, $50, $60 on a pair of tongs that are going to get used once a month, once every couple of months. So use the tools that you have on hand. If you have a pair of, channel locks or any other kind of pliers, those will get you by if you don't use tongs that much. Now, the type and style of tongs that you get when and if you do buy your first set of blacksmithing tongs is going to vary with the style of work that you typically do. If you're primarily making railroad spike meat turners or forks or railroad spike knives, you may want to invest in a pair of railroad spike tongs. They make different types. A large pair of bolt jaw tongs like this that can fit the head of the railroad spike in between this swell out of the jaws also works. I've used pairs like this for railroad spikes with a high degree of success, but if you're working with pretty small stuff, you're probably going to want to start out with a nice pair of wolf jaw tongs like these, simply because they can grab pretty relatively small things down to about a 1/4 inch, and they offer the versatility of being able to hold things in multiple angles and you'd be surprised how useful that is. Now, as you're getting into blacksmithing, buying many different pairs of tongs just because you think you're gonna need them is a great way to waste your money, if I'm being honest. And that's simply because you're gonna find a pair of tongs that you like, and until you really need that niche pair, you're probably gonna use that one single pair of tongs over and over and over again until they don't really fit your needs, so to speak, for a given project. So I recommend, if you're going to buy tongs, if you're not going to mostly stick with just holding a long piece of steel while you're working on it by hand, or again, using a glove, buy one pair of highly rated tongs, do your research, make sure they do hold up to a lot of people using them and scrutinizing them and have good reviews, and use them until you get good with them. And then once you find kind of that niche that you need to fill, then start branching out and just kind of buy or make tongs as kind of your need evolves as you get better and progress in your skill in blacksmithing. Now, the other option, and one that I highlighted on this channel, was hand forging your own pair of tongs without the need of owning a pair of tongs already. That is one of the downfalls of a lot of project videos, is making tongs tends to require you to have a pair of tongs. You do not have to make this pair of tongs. This is just the one that I wanted to highlight in the video, where I wanted a pair of flat jaw tongs that can hold pretty thin flat stock in them, and really just try making a pair of tongs for that video. But I was able to do this without a pair of tongs because it started out as a 3 to 4 foot long piece of rebar that I was able to draw out the reins from. I forged the jaw, boss, and reins on one end of the bar, got them nearly down all the way to complete, and then flipped the bar over and forged the other end back to the center, and I cut it down the middle and then was able to punch the hole, rivet everything together, and it all worked out pretty well. If you want to see that process, once again, there's the link to that video. There's very many ways to forge a pair of tongs that are not nearly as in-depth or complex as that. And I do plan to highlight those as I get my own shop set up, but again, that's going to be in a little bit, so for the time being, I'm going to continue making these little talking head videos. I'll probably post some more travel videos in the future because I am making my way to Washington State here in just another month. So, in review, the top 4 tools that you absolutely need to get into blacksmithing are a hammer, an anvil, a forge, and most of the time a pair of tongs. However, I hope I gave you different options to explore when considering buying or making or otherwise obtaining these tools to get into the wonderful craft that is blacksmithing. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me and the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. And new feature, having just made YouTube level 1 monetization, you have the option to become a member on my channel, which will give you badges to highlight your member status, occasional member exclusive posts, recognition on your comments of the videos by a badge, and I do plan to start making things like custom emojis and different things that can be highlighted on live streams and video comments in the future. I only have one tier at the moment. It is 99 cents a month. So if you want to help contribute to the channel, that is currently the only way that I can make any money off of the content that I produce, and it would really help me out in affording the materials I need to make projects, camera stuff to continue making my content better, lighting, different things like that. So that would absolutely go a long way in helping me continue to make content, continue to improve, and hopefully make content that you all enjoy. Thank you for watching, and keep on rocking.